Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partner with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across Australia and the globe to train leaders, develop engagement strategies and empower people to organise for change. In 2020, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks who want to make a difference, inspire, give hope and enable leadership to achieve their shared purpose. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your favourite weekly centre-left, blatantly Labor-biased political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And on this week's episode, we are joined by the New South Wales Labor Shadow Minister for the Environment and the member for Port Stephens, Kate Washington. Great name. And she is coming on to talk about the whole koala thing, basically, koala killer and the shit fight that happened between the Nationals leader, John Barilaro, and the Berejiklian government and how it almost imploded, which was all very bizarre for everyone else watching outside of New South Wales and probably even for people in New South Wales. So anyway, Kate's on today to talk all about that and just sort of environmental politics as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and we're now on Amazon. There you go. Didn't even know they did podcasts. So, or also you can just follow us on your favorite podcast app, really. But if you are a Apple Podcast user, please leave us a rating and a review. That would be great. Got a review actually the other day, which I thought was kind of funny. It says, really insightful podcast on social democratic movements both in Australia and internationally. Would really help if there was a co-host. That Kent Rowe bloke seems really knowledgeable. You had great chemistry and I reckon it would really work. And that was from Batman-08. And I then called up Kent Rowe and said, Kent, I really appreciate you leaving a rating and a review, but did you really need to sort of pitch to come on the podcast? And he said, I didn't do that. So Kent, you've got a fan out there, whoever you are, Batman. So you could be like Batman and leave us a review. That would be great. We'd really appreciate that. And don't forget to follow us on all of our socials, the Dunn Street socials at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And this episode was once again produced by Rebecca Connell from La Trobe University. Done another great job this week. Thank you, Rebecca. Also, a little bit of apology. The audio wasn't great on today's episode. We just had some technical problems throughout and we were just trying to manage it. But it's one of those ones that just didn't seem to work out for us. The technical gods weren't on our side today. But anyway, let's get to today's episode. We're taping this one on a Friday afternoon in lockdown Melbourne, and joining me on the line from Free New South Wales is the Shadow Minister for Environment and the member for Port Stephens, Kate Washington. Welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Very excited.
I was thinking today about your name. You've got a really good name for politics. I feel like when your parents gave you your name, that was it. You had to, you had to run for office.
Yeah, I had no choice. Yeah, right. It's not something that occurred to me till a bit later in life. So,
well, I've really thought about it in the last, sort of 12 hours. I think you need to run for a federal seat, and I think that opens up a whole bunch of campaign T-shirts like "Send Washington to Canberra."
I like it. But I also like my federal member here, so Meryl Swanson. Thank you very much.
Right, very good. Not to put any pressure on Meryl, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, watch out, all right? This is a good campaign slogan here.
That's very good.
Kate, for those of us living outside of New South Wales, just give us a bit of a backstory to how koalas became a number one issue in New South Wales state politics. How has this happened? What legislative changes occurred, or why do we find that this lovable creature, this native icon of our nation, is now under threat in New South Wales?
Well, it's a bit complex, but at the heart of it is the threat that it's currently facing, which is, extinction. So the recent parliamentary inquiry in New South Wales into koalas found that koalas in New South Wales will become extinct before 2050 unless urgent action is taken. Now, what has got us to that place is a number of things, but one of the main problems has been the government, the coalition government, after the 2015 election, removed all of the environmental protections and the laws that were in place and replaced them with weaker environmental laws. And before they did that, they were told that those laws that they were proposing would lead to broad-scale land clearing. And they were told that by scientists and experts and, numerous stakeholders that knew what they were talking about. They ignored that. They still put those laws into place. And now, as a result, we've got, a real issue where the developers get to do pretty much what they like, and the koalas are collateral damage.
I'm assuming that a lot of these legislative changes that were brought in when the Conservatives got back into power were driven by their developer mates, essentially. Is it as crude as that?
Yeah, you've got the coalitions, this unholy alliance between the Nationals and the Liberals. The National Party says that they fight for farmers, which is a joke. They, and we've learnt that very recently, their interests are not with the farmers, it's with developers and big agribusiness, and they don't care for the environment. They push back on every count. They've mismanaged water. They have put a feral species on a pedestal in Kosciuszko National Park, which is driving the native species to extinction. They are just, when it comes to the environment, the National Party are complete vandals. And they would rather, every national park be opened up and for logging and just opened up generally. So the unholy alliance with the Liberals and Nationals is very ugly, and it played out in a very ugly way very recently.
Aside from you being the shadow spokesperson for the environment, this policy or this sweeping legislative change that has been brought in by the coalition government has actually impacted you in your local community of Port Stephens. Just want to sort of share with us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's very convenient to be the spokesperson for the environment, because it's pretty much all we talk about when we're in Stephens, because we just face battle after battle trying to stop the government from doing stupid stuff. So in the past, we've had to fight off the developer arm of the government, urban growth, from pursuing a development in an area called Fisherman's Bay. It was called koala habitat. It took the community to take the government to court for them to stop that development. Then the next round was the government selling off core koala habitat in a place called the Mambo Wetlands. They did it via an online auction overnight to a developer. It took 3 years of a community campaign to get the government to buy it back. Then, right now, we've got an expansion of a quarry which involves the bulldozing of 52 hectares of critical koala habitat that has been approved and fast-tracked by the state government. And the fight is now on to try and make Susan Lee at the federal level, she's the gatekeeper on this, unfortunately, make a decision that's in the interests of koalas and the environment instead of the quarry.
When did this, you've just talked about this sort of 3-year campaign that's been going on in your community. I did see some footage of you stand up in Parliament's late July, I think it was, to raise this issue. When did it really start to kick off and get a bit of sort of statewide or even, indeed national coverage? What kind of brought this to a head?
Well, the latest campaign is centred around the quarry at Brandy Hill. what brought that to a head was the approval of it and the fast tracking of it by the government. So it was approved by the department, fast tracked, and then it went to the Independent Planning Commission. Now, the Independent Planning Commission, it sounds like a nice thing that it might be independent, but it still has to apply the government's laws. And when they're weak and they can't even knock back something that's going to impact koalas locally so significantly, and in the wake of the bushfires and in the wake of the koala inquiry and the 42 recommendations, which says that you've got to preserve habitat, the IPC had no authority to knock it back because the laws were inadequate. And indeed, in its own findings and in its decision, it made comment, which was really unusual. It made comment about the need for the government to consider its laws and how they are protecting or not protecting koalas, particularly in the wake of the bushfires.
And then between you getting up in Parliament and speaking on this issue and the expansion of this quarry in your own backyard, then this sort of drama unfolds in Parliament a couple of weeks ago between the Nationals and the Liberals. What happened here? Walk us through the colour and movement of this. What just look from a sort of a social media distance here, lockdown in Melbourne, kind of. I was living vicariously through what was going on. How did this come about?
Well, it is extraordinary that the National Party decided that they would try and blow up their own government over koalas, over weakening protections for koalas at a time when we all know that they are facing extinction. We all know who should be facing extinction, and it's not the koalas. It was actually extraordinary. The policy that they have got upset about had been aired in 2016. It had been put into place end of November for consultation and then came into effect in March. Now, the National Party must be the slowest, stupidest people ever because they only noticed about 3 weeks ago because it just hit the fan out of the blue from our perspective. It's almost like there's been so many instances where the Deputy Premier has cried wolf and threatened to leave the coalition, say I'm no longer going to be Deputy Premier because I've got to speak for the bush, all this rubbish. And I think this was just one too many times for the Premier. And she actually stared him down this time and for good reason, because the petulance and the dummy spitting that's going on by the National Party seems to get their way every time. But the problem is we've still got apparently the negotiations are still going to happen on this policy. We don't know if the government's going to maintain their position and they're going to weaken the protections that are in place. I mean, they were designed over many years, significant input from scientists, and yet you've still got National Party members railing against them to the point where they want to bring the government to its knees. It's extraordinary.
So unpack that for me. So what exactly was this is the bit I was getting confused about, because I was trying to work out who actually was trying to kill the koalas here more. Was it the Liberal part of the coalition or it was the National part of the coalition? So what was the policy area that the Nationals were taking issue with in terms of within their government?
It is actually a koala protection policy. Like that is what they decided to, that's the hill they decided to die on. And they are arguing that places too much responsibility on landholders, particularly farmers, and saying that the mapping is wrong, that they can't build driveways, that they can't do the work that they need to do on farms. It's complete rubbish. They have divided the community based on mistruths and lies to the point where people think that the policy is going to stop people doing absolutely anything on their farms, which is a complete joke. It doesn't do that. But then the broader and the more important point to this is that they keep the National Party keeps using farmers like they're a Trojan horse. The interests that they are really representing are not farmers. And we know this now because we, this week in Parliament, received documents that we called for through the parliamentary process to find out exactly whose interests they were representing when they were going to the Minister for Planning over this koala planning policy. And predominantly, those interests are developer interests. They were making representations on behalf of developers and significant developers, and some of those developers were also donors to the party.
So you have is it John Barilaro who's is he the deputy, or he's the deputy premier of the state, but he's the leader of the National Party, is that right?
Correct.
And so he goes on Sky News and says it's a property rights issue and that will prevent farmers from building property without getting council approval, was my sort of take on that. How is this being played out in your electorate, for example, vis-a-vis a sort of it's actually an environmental issue, big fella, but...
Well, nobody raised any concerns with the SEP, with the planning policy to me locally. It just hasn't been an issue. It was on nobody's radar because it's a planning policy that essentially replaces an existing planning policy. It puts requirements onto council to undertake plans of management. The changes were relatively innocuous, and so it really speaks to the tensions in the coalition. If this was enough for them to have the government come to its knees, it was extraordinary.
You don't really have a dog in the game, do you, when you're watching Nationals and Liberals fight amongst each other? Just you sort of, never interrupt your enemies when they're in the middle of a complete clusterfuck, or something to that effect. But
that's it.
Yeah, I think that was it. That was the it is that is what it is, isn't it? I really liked the Labor leader of the opposition's response to it. I thought it was very smart when she said that she was critical of the Nationals trying to undermine the leadership of the Premier. It had great tone to sort of say, look, our democracy is more important than this. You're an idiot, and what you're doing here is actually undermining the stability that we need in government. And I think if you're Gladys, you'd be kind of a bit confused about that. Are you trolling me, or are you being genuine, or are you just trying to get in my head? Or I just think the natural thing would be to sort of lash out and say you're all idiots, right? But I think it was really, really smart for Jodie to do that. I just want to get your thoughts on that. And the way broadly speaking, how you guys have responded to this, this scenario that's going on across on the other side of the Parliament.
Largely, we realised very early on that it wasn't really a koala issue. It should never have been about koalas. It's about the frailty of the coalition and their ability to govern was at the heart of the issue. And that's where Jodie McKay went, quite rightly. It was about, and when we're facing this enormous health and economic crisis, the last thing anybody in the community wants to see is the government that they are relying on to be able to put food on the table and survive through these really difficult times. The last thing they want to be seeing is these idiots fighting over an innocuous change to a koala planning policy. And the instability of the government was very real and continues to be, because you've still got National Party members that are threatening to sit on the crossbench if there aren't concessions given. So it's far from over as well.
The issue itself was given a great platform when Friendly Geordies, also known as Jordan Shanks, on his YouTube channel and various social media platforms, raised this issue. I think he actually did a number of interviews with your good self, and no small thing, 75,000 views on one of the particular videos that he did talking about the issue. How much awareness raising has come off the back of this issue, and what level of pressure do you think it's putting on the Berejiklian government?
Well, the video I did with Jordan Shanks was about the Brandy Hill Quarry and the current campaign to get Susan Lee to reject it, and yeah, it was really good getting Jordan's audience understanding what was going on and the broader picture about how we got here, and the ability to have that longer conversation about that was a really good opportunity. And so in terms of the campaign, it means that we've had a lot more people following and understanding and contacting Susan Lee. But since then, we've also had people perhaps with a different approach to Jordan's, like Olivia Newton-John, Jimmy Barnes, Magda Zabansky. We've got a whole lot of other celebrities giving voice to our campaign here as well. And, you know, it's people were watching, you know, during the bushfires, that is still very much in people's minds and hearts. And a lot of people here in Australia and worldwide gave a lot of money in support of the wildlife and the losses that were being seen and shown across screens worldwide. And to think now that we're still stupid enough to be approving the clearing of unburnt, pristine, critical koala habitat, people can't believe it. And it's just so, it's just goes against everything that everybody's feeling right now about the importance of retaining the things that we've got.
You hail from the Hunter region in New South Wales, and it's a part of the country that seems to be generating a lot more energy around the debate about fossil fuels versus jobs and the environment. And I don't think it needs to be framed in that way, but that seems to be certainly how some media outlets are framing it. I just want to get your insights. We had Felicity Wade from Lean on the podcast a couple of weeks ago to talk about that very issue. And she sort of spoke about, at that time, some of the work that was done by Lean with unions, in particular the AMWU, at a local level. And I noticed on the weekend there was an announcement by Lean and the union, the AMWU, that they were going to make a commitment to work together and sort of address what I call the third rail of Australian politics. Do you welcome an initiative like that with not just your Labor hat on, but also hailing from a region that's sort of in the news a lot about this particular issue?
Yeah, the discussions and the work going on between Lean and the AMWU is really welcome. It's such a sensible conversation. And as you mentioned, the pitting of jobs versus the environment is enormously frustrating. There's a lot of jobs to be had in the environment, which we saw with Jacinda Ardern shortly after COVID, when she announced $1 billion to create 11,000 jobs. There's the transition from fossil fuels is a really complex and tricky conversation, and it needs to be had with the workers that are involved. And here in the Hunter, we are at the heart of the issues, and it's really tough. It's a really tough conversation to have with a lot of people, and it's going to be really hard politically. So to have Lean and AMWU having healthy, respectful and open conversations with environment groups and workers, that's exactly what we need to do. And as a movement, I think Labor is the only party that's capable of having those conversations. We are the only ones that are going to be capable of moving us towards where we need to go, because everybody else just tries to divide and tell mistruths, and that's not going to help the workers. If we keep saying that we're going to keep burning coal to create energy, and we're going to or as the Nats want, they want to build a new coal-fired power station up the Hunter Valley, or they want the government to. You know, they aren't sensible conversations, because that is not where the market is going, and we need the workers to be brought with us so that we can all transition together in a way that's respectful, and so that the jobs remain. And I tell you, I'm really at the pointy end. Port Stephens, yes, we talk koalas all the time. The biggest employer in Port Stephens is actually in the sector is manufacturing. So I've got Tomago aluminium smelter that uses 12 to 13% of the state's electricity every single day. I've also got the largest user of gas just outside the boundary, which is Orica, that creates ammonium nitrate. And it's and so we are high intensity manufacturing here. I know one of my other manufacturers is trying to stay afloat because of high electricity prices, and yet he's building the steel alloy rods that secure wind turbines to the ground. So we're really at the pointy end of the conversation around energy reliability, affordability, and the transition to clean energy.
You're talking about the tricky nature of that conversation that needs to be had, and I completely understand that. How frustrating is it when then the Prime Minister sort of wanders in with his remarks? Was it this week or last week? These weeks all seem to blend into one when you can't leave your house. About gas, and saying, well, if you don't build if you don't invest in gas, then we will. As a local member, but also with your shadow portfolio hat on, how frustrating is that when you try and actually have these conversations with people saying, look, there needs to be a future. We have to move away from this sort of stuff.
He conveniently made that announcement in my electorate. Just a little bit frustrating. The conversations are really hard, but we cannot walk away from the tough conversations, and there's a whole lot of people, including the Prime Minister, that would rather pander to and go down the easy path, but we can't afford to be doing that, and that's the problem. And politically, he will take the easy path and put us all at risk in the process, whereas others are having conversations on the ground all the time about what it looks like, what we need to be doing to try and get towards where we've got a much brighter future.
Just draw on some of those conversations, because I'm always interested in getting those insights. I said to Felicity when she was on the show a couple of weeks back, I said to her, look, I grew up in Gippsland in Victoria's eastern region, in the Latrobe Valley, which is heavily reliant on brown coal. All of my cousins all left high school and went into jobs in working in what we call the open cut. So these conversations I'm very aware of on a personal level, and talking to my family members and talking to people that live in the valley. Hazelwood has shut down, and they know that there's the clock is ticking on all of the other coal operations there, and they don't have they don't support coal like they support their local footy team. They're not like go Magpies, and by the way, go coal. They're go jobs. We want job security. That's ultimately what it is. That's the level of conversation that isn't being spoken about when politicians come in and speak for the workers. What are the kind of conversations you're having with folks in your community? What are their concerns? What's going through their minds in terms of what the future looks like for them?
Well, it varies, as you would imagine, a lot. But you're right. The people that work in the valley, in the power stations, and in the coal mines, they value being able to put food on their tables and feed their families. That's what their jobs mean. Their jobs mean that they can give their children a good future. So that's what we need to be talking to them about. It's what their future, how they can continue to do that as we go forward. And so that we need to be talking about tangible, real jobs as an alternative. Just to talk transition gets us nowhere. We need to be creating industry that is clean energy industry, whether it's circular economy, recycling industry. We need to be looking at concrete, very real jobs on the ground that people can go to, and that's what we need the government to be focusing on, particularly in an area like ours. I mean, we've got the state energy minister announcing renewable hubs in areas of political convenience for them, rather than in an area where we know that there are workers that are going to be out of jobs, and it's enormously frustrating. So, yeah, going back to lean and ANWU, I know that's a primary focus of theirs. And yeah, the conversations I have with all of my manufacturers, it's they are still trying to work out how we get through to being able to rely purely on renewable energy.
Yeah, and no one says it's easy, is it? But what I do like about Lean and the AMW initiative is it brings different interests and different resources together, and to sit down at a table and go, right, how do we find solutions to the problems that we're having right now? And I just welcome that, and that actually makes me, I'm a very solutions-oriented kind of bloke, and I like to see more of this sort of work being done at this granular level as well.
Yeah, and I've got to say that alongside their work, there is in the Hunter, we have got a lot of different organisations being very proactive and practical in working towards solutions with no help from the government. I think everybody has decided, yeah, we really are on our own on this. And like when BHP closed, we need to look after ourselves. We need to learn lessons from other communities that have gone through this around the world, and we need to learn those lessons. And we've got so much opportunity here. That's the thing. And we need to be starting to talk about this, what's coming up, as an opportunity. Everyone just sees it as a threat, and we need to be talking about the advanced manufacturing and significant opportunities in defence, all sorts of different sectors that we have got the capacity and the experience and the expertise already on the ground here. That's where we need to be focused on.
I think I said to you off mic before, you're the first state Labor politician I've interviewed for the podcast, and that's on me. But I am just interested in getting your take on how things are going for state Labor in New South Wales under the new leadership of Jodie. Is it Mackay or Mackay?
Mackay.
It is Mackay. Grade 2 primary school teacher, Mrs. Mackay. Loved her. How are things going? Because look, from an outside perspective, it's hard to get, the way our media is sort of geared towards sort of parochialism. It's hard to get a sense of what's going on in other states. But certainly from an outsider's perspective, things are looking good for Labor in New South Wales at the moment.
Jodie Mackay's doing a terrific job. I mean, and in difficult times, being an opposition leader during a crisis is never going to be fun. And she's managed that in a very respectful, careful way, because as we said before, as we discussed, that we don't want to be dividing, we don't want to be attacking at a time when people are genuinely doing it really tough. There's a sense now, unlike the experience that you've had in Victoria, that things are a bit more relaxed, and consequently we're seeing the government kind of at a meltdown stage. They've been in for 9.5 years. We've got them leaking from cabinet all the time. They are happy to talk about each other to us all the time. It's really unhealthy, and we don't understand. They've got several ministers that are. There's several ministers that shouldn't be ministers any longer. There's an ICAC inquiry about a former member, and we had ICAC raid Parliament just before question time this week. I mean, if I could, it's a little bit. There's a crumbling castle going on here. People aren't necessarily seeing it, but we are. It's happening before our eyes. So I guess that's our job, is to make sure that people see it and understand exactly what's going on.
And build a credible argument for why you guys should govern in 2023. Is that right?
Yes, unfortunately.
That feels like years away.
Those people I'm almost at the point. Well, some media are at the point where they say, "Well, what's your policy? What's your policy on koalas?" And I'm saying, my policy is to stop them causing as much carnage as possible before we get to the next election. Like, we've just got to stop the destruction as much as possible over the next couple of years. Then we can talk to you about policy. I mean,
yeah,
there's so much still to play out.
And a good segue before we wrap up, give you a chance to plug for people who are listening to the show how they can get involved in the campaign to support the good work that you guys are doing, both in the Hunter and more statewide in New South Wales in terms of protecting our natural habitat.
Well, I'm going to be really parochial and suggest people check out a Facebook page, which is Save Port Stephens Koalas. They're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, and they are doing an amazing job of trying to protect the 52 hectares from being cleared. More broadly, just follow Jodie McKay on her socials, follow my socials, just be really selfish. And, where there's a lot of good things going on. It's hard to get the message out through the media. It's one of our biggest threats to trying to change things at the next election. The Murdoch press is astonishingly awful, as we all know, and it's hard to get messages out. So social media has got an increasing importance, and similarly, podcasts like this, increasing importance of getting our message out.
Well, Kate Washington, we appreciate you taking time out of you. You had a pretty crazy day today, and we are very grateful for your time and contribution to the podcast, and we wish you the best of luck with the campaign going forward, and we'd love to have you back on in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been lovely having a chat, and I really hope that everyone in Melbourne gets to spend a bit more time outdoors soon.
Thank you. So do I.